They say grief changes people, but what if it opens the door to something far more sinister? The Invitation, 2015, isn't just a dinner party gone wrong. It's a masterclass in psychological tension, where every shared glance and polite smile could be a silent scream. Directed by Karen Kusama, this slow-burning thriller traps both its characters and its viewers in a claustrophobic space filled with awkward toasts, ghosted emotions, and a creeping dread that never seems to leave the room. It doesn't rely on jump scares or gore, but rather on something more unsettling: doubt. Doubt in what you see, what you hear, and who you trust. What makes The Invitation stand apart is how real it feels. It's not a haunted house or a possessed doll. It's the idea that the people you once loved, who once laughed with you over wine and dinner, might now be strangers with a purpose you can't quite name. Or worse, they're still the same, but they've seen something you haven't. Behind its minimalist setting and subdued performances lies a meticulously crafted descent into collective manipulation, buried trauma, and the chilling comfort of cultic certainty. And as the film's final frame expands the nightmare beyond the walls of that one Los Angeles home, it leaves behind a single, gnawing question. How many others have already accepted the invitation? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about The Invitation, 2015. And once you hear them, you might never look at a dinner party the same way again. Fact 1. The house is real, and it's watching you. The house in The Invitation doesn't just host the story, it is the story. Nestled in the Hollywood Hills, the home where all the action unfolds is a real, privately owned residence. But unlike most movie locations, this house wasn't just a backdrop. It was a psychological tool. Karen Kusama deliberately chose this modern yet cold space to amplify the emotional isolation of the characters. Long hallways, distant sightlines, and glass walls were not merely aesthetic, they were used to create a constant sense of exposure. There's nowhere to hide, even as secrets boil beneath the surface. What's stranger is how the cast interacted with the house. Shot largely in chronological order, the actors reportedly began feeling genuinely uneasy as filming progressed. Some even claimed to feel observed, especially during the final week when the story took its darkest turns. But here's the kicker. The layout of the house is disorienting by design. Kusama altered spatial geography using subtle camera tricks. Doors opened in impossible directions. Rooms felt larger or smaller than they should. The home became a silent manipulator, like a second antagonist. So, while the tension comes from the characters, the architecture itself was weaponized to make you feel trapped too. Do you think the horror came from what the people did or from the space that allowed them to do it? Fact 2. Logan Marshall Green didn't know who to trust, even off camera. Logan Marshall Green's portrayal of Will, the grieving, paranoid protagonist, is so immersive that many assumed he was deeply method. But the truth is more unsettling. Marshall Green wasn't always sure who among the cast was in on it either. To preserve the mystery and unease, Kusama withheld parts of the script from certain actors, including Logan. For scenes involving secret alliances or coded behavior, only the necessary actors knew the full context. This meant that when Will suspected someone, Logan often did too. Adding to the tension, Kusama encouraged the ensemble to stay partially in character between takes. Conversations at lunch or in holding areas often mirrored the film's emotional temperature: polite, distant, vaguely wrong. The actors playing the cult members reportedly formed their own mini-group off-set, creating a psychological echo of the story's internal divisions. The result? A lead performance that bleeds discomfort, confusion, and raw suspicion, because those feelings weren't entirely fictional. When a film makes its lead actor feel like an outsider even during production, is it an artistic triumph or a psychological risk? Fact 3. The cult was based on a real movement with deadly consequences. In The Invitation, the cult known as The Invitation cloaks itself in the language of healing. They speak of release, of peace, of transcendence. But the film's version of a New Age support group masks something far more dangerous: a death cult with a soft voice. What many don't know is that Kusama and screenwriters Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi drew inspiration from real-world spiritual groups that blurred the line between therapy and control. One major influence was Heaven's Gate, the infamous 1997 cult, where 39 members committed mass suicide, believing they would ascend to a spaceship trailing the Hale-Bopp comet. But The Invitation isn't a direct copy. It's more terrifying because of how ordinary it feels. The cult doesn't preach madness, they sell relief. relief from grief, relief from fear. It's seductive because it doesn't demand obedience, it offers comfort. Even the use of video testimony in the film mirrors how actual cults lure followers through intimate, emotionally manipulative recordings. The smiling, serene woman who talks about death in the film was modeled on real exit tapes used in group indoctrinations. So next time you hear someone say, "I've found peace," what exactly did they have to give up to get it? Factnalia. Kusama hit a second ending inside the first. When the invitation fades to black after that chilling final shot, red lanterns glowing across the hills, most viewers take a sharp breath and call it a wrap. But Karen Kusama insists there's an invisible second ending buried inside that final moment. The sound design plays a critical role here. As Will and Kira stare into the darkness, distant sirens start to echo not one, but many. Kusama revealed in interviews that the audio layering included police, fire trucks, and helicopters, all swelling subtly beneath the quiet. Why? Because the lanterns weren't just symbolic, they were signals. The implication is that this dinner party wasn't an isolated ritual. It was one node in a citywide or even nationwide event. That's not an epilogue, it's a second horror film starting in the background. This choice was deliberate. Kusama wanted to upend the expectation of closure. Instead of safety, the final shot widens the threat. And yet, she chose not to show any of it directly. There's no montage of other houses, no bodies, no chaos, just the chilling realization that something vast has already begun. So, what scares you more? The violence you see or the violence still waiting outside the frame? Fact 5. The dinner party structure was a ruse for pacing experimentation. At first glance, the invitation appears to follow a familiar structure: dinner, conversation, tension, explosion. But beneath that surface lies a pacing experiment that even veteran screenwriters would hesitate to attempt. The script deliberately front-loads its tension without clear payoff. For over an hour, nothing major happens. And yet, you can't look away. Why? Because the film uses micro-escalations. A missed toast, a locked door, an offhand comment. Each moment doesn't explode, it corrodes. Karen Kusama and her team structured the film like a psychological Jenga tower. Each line of dialogue removes a block. Each silence makes the stack wobble. It's a masterclass in audience manipulation, especially considering the inciting incident. The true turn toward horror doesn't arrive until nearly the final 20 minutes. The irony is that many early test audiences walked out during screenings, calling the pacing too slow. But critics and genre enthusiasts later praised this exact quality, noting that the slow boil made the final moments feel earned and far more horrifying. Is delayed terror more effective than constant shocks? Or are we too conditioned to expect explosions before appetizers? Fact 6. The deaths were staged to feel emotionally wrong, not visually shocking. Most thrillers rely on gruesome imagery to drive their kills, not the invitation. Kusama did something far more disturbing. She made the deaths feel wrong, even when they weren't gory. Take the moment when Pruitt snaps Miguel's neck. It's clean, no blood, no screaming, but it feels horrific in a uniquely intimate way. Why? Because the violence is interpersonal, done by someone the victim had just toasted with. There's no music cue, no stylized editing, just a brutal, quiet ending to a friendly evening. Kusama instructed her cast to perform the killings as though they were acts of mercy. The cultists believe they're freeing their friends. That belief translates into body language, calm faces, tender gestures, even apologies. The camera often lingers not on the act itself, but on the reaction, eyes widening, breath catching, someone turning away too late. Even the final scuffle avoids traditional choreography. The violence is clumsy, panicked, human. It's not meant to thrill, it's meant to hollow you out. So which is worse, the act of violence or the belief that it was an act of love? Fact 7. The real horror is in the silences. While most horror films build dread through sound, shrieking violins, rising crescendos, or eerie drones, the invitation flips the formula. It weaponizes silence. But this wasn't a post-production accident. It was baked into the script. Karen Kusama instructed her team to let conversations die. Not interrupt them with music, not fill the gaps with Foley, but allow awkward pauses to settle and spread. This meant that many scenes were mixed to allow ambient room tone to dominate. The clink of a glass, a chair shifting, a breath held too long. One standout example is the "I don't want to play this game" moment. A strange party game spirals into a confession of death, and then nothing. The silence stretches long enough to make viewers physically squirm. There's no relief, no soundtrack to tell you how to feel. This technique, inspired in part by European minimalism, creates a fragile emotional landscape. Every pause feels like it might shatter into violence, or worse, reveal something you didn't want to know. So when a film uses silence to disturb, not comfort, are we still watching a movie, or are we trapped in the room too? Fact 8. The Invitation was almost a found footage film. It's hard to imagine The Invitation without its sleek, deliberate cinematography. But in early development, the filmmakers considered something wildly different: a found footage format. Screenwriters Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi explored the idea of telling the story through cell phones, security cameras, and handheld devices. The dinner party would be seen through modern digital artifacts, vlogs, surveillance feeds, even live streams. The idea was to reflect how curated and performative grief had become in online spaces. Ultimately, Karen Kusama rejected the concept, fearing it would strip the film of its emotional complexity. The camera needed to observe, not intrude, she explained. She believed the horror would feel more insidious if it unfolded within a composed, elegant frame like evil hiding behind symmetry. Still, remnants of that early idea remain. The video shown to the guests, the cult's promotional footage, is shot in a way that eerily mimics real-world YouTube therapy cults. And some of the lighting choices mimic webcams or security floodlights. What does it say when even horror needs to look curated like a brand? Fact 9. The lantern colors were coded, but only for the cast. The final shot of The Invitation, with its glowing red lanterns scattered across the Hollywood Hills, left viewers haunted. But what most people don't know is that color coding played a hidden role throughout the film, and the cast knew it. The audience, however, never got the key. Karen Kusama gave each character a dominant color motif, representing their emotional alignment, grief, denial, manipulation, or surrender. These were subtle cues: wine tones, muted earth shades, bone whites. But the red lanterns? They were a signal for acceptance of death. Even more intriguing, Kusama used the color red sparingly throughout the film until the very end. When it appears on a wine label, a candle, a lipstick, it's meant to subconsciously anchor the viewer to the ideology of the Invitation cult. The red lanterns in the final frame weren't just visual shock, they were a quiet confirmation. These people chose this fate. Will and Kira survived because they didn't glow red. So the question lingers: if the party had ended differently, would you have lit a lantern too? Fact 10. Pruitt's backstory was originally much darker. In The Invitation, John Carroll Lynch's performance as Pruitt is disturbingly restrained, a soft-spoken man who calmly admits to killing his wife in a moment of weakness. But what audiences saw on screen was only a sliver of what was originally written. Early drafts of the script gave Pruitt a far more chilling backstory. Instead of an isolated incident, his past included a pattern of violence masked by spiritual repentance. He wasn't just a grieving husband. He was a believer who had found purpose in annihilation. The idea was to portray how dangerous redemption narratives could become in the wrong hands. Karen Kusama ultimately scaled this back. She believed that subtlety would be more unsettling, that viewers would project their own fears onto the quiet menace Pruitt exuded. John Carroll Lynch, known for playing killers with unnerving sincerity, crafted a character who felt real because he didn't seem like a villain. But knowing what was left out cast his performance in a new light. His calm isn't peace, it's calculation. His sorrow isn't guilt, it's doctrine. Is it more terrifying to know the full extent of someone's darkness, or to be left guessing just how deep it goes? Fact 11. The Invitation was written during a time of personal trauma. Writers Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi penned The Invitation in the aftermath of profound personal loss. Both men experienced tragedies in their close circles: death, grief, and emotional disintegration. Rather than make a film about those experiences, they chose to embed them beneath the surface of a horror story. The dinner party became a metaphor for emotional repression. The smiling hosts represented the unbearable facade of moving on, while Will embodied the raw, unfiltered grief that no one wants to see at the table. Every awkward silence, every sidelong glance reflected their personal truth. People don't know how to be around grief, so they hide it. Or worse, they medicate it with ideology. Karen Kusama, moved by the script's emotional honesty, amplified this layer through casting, blocking, and performance. She encouraged the actors to play their roles not as villains or victims, but as people trying and failing to survive their pain. The result is a horror film that feels more like an emotional autopsy. Not just what happened, but what was missing all along. So maybe the scariest part isn't that people die, it's that they smile through your suffering until they decide you're not welcome anymore. Fact 12. The cult's dogma was built from self-help manuals. Unlike many cinematic cults that rely on mysticism or supernatural promises, The Invitation grounded its philosophy in something more unsettling: real-world self-help language. The dialogue isn't about gods or demons, it's about letting go, finding peace, accepting reality. To build this doctrine, the filmmakers dissected dozens of modern wellness books, grief counseling, seminars, and personal empowerment courses. They borrowed the rhetoric, then bent it. Phrases like, "there is no right or wrong, only freedom," or "we're not our pain," appear almost verbatim from pop psychology literature. What makes this approach terrifying is how believable it is. Viewers might recognize the language from yoga studios, Instagram quotes, or TED Talks. It's not evil, it's inspirational, until it's weaponized. The character of Eden, in particular, embodies this tension. Her serenity isn't fake, but it's fanatical. Her grief has been metabolized into something palatable, even beautiful. But that beauty comes at a cost. If healing requires forgetting, and forgetting means erasing, then who decides what deserves to be remembered? Fact 13. The wine scene was a control experiment. One of the most discomforting moments in The Invitation comes early, during the special wine toast. It's framed as generous hospitality, an exclusive bottle, offered with reverence. But beneath the surface, the scene is a psychological test. And the audience fails it. Karen Kusama confirmed that the wine was never meant to be just wine. It's a form of compliance gauging. Who drinks without question? Who hesitates? Who pushes back? The cult members know the answer before anything escalates. They're watching for emotional obedience. Interestingly, the actors weren't told the significance of the wine until after filming. Kusama wanted their body language and hesitation to reflect genuine uncertainty. Some, like Will, sip cautiously. Others, like Claire, outright refuse, marking her as the anomaly. The wine never needed to be poisoned in that moment. It wasn't about harm, it was about control, a dress rehearsal for a darker climax. So when someone offers you a glass and says it'll make things easier, do you drink it? Or do you ask what they put inside the bottle? Fact 14. Claire's exit was the only unscripted survival. When Claire gets up from the table and announces she's leaving, the tension spikes. It's the moment where every viewer leans forward, asking, will they let her go? Then, surprisingly, they do. No one stops her, no violence. Just a door opening into the unknown. What many don't realize is that Claire's exit wasn't in the original draft. In early versions of the script, every character who resisted was meant to be eliminated. But Kusama fought to keep one ambiguous escape. She wanted to introduce uncertainty, the possibility that not everyone who disobeys dies. The choice pays off. Claire's survival or possible death off-screen adds a ripple of dread that lingers well beyond the final act. Did she make it home? Did someone follow her? Was her freedom part of the plan all along? By refusing to answer, the film dares the audience to fill in the blank. It's a narrative echo of the film's theme. You don't always know what happens behind closed doors. And maybe that's what makes it worse. Fact 15. The Invitation script was written in just 2 weeks. It might come as a shock, but one of the most meticulously plotted horror films of the 2010 seconds was first drafted in under 15 days. Writers Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi, riding a wave of intense emotional urgency, outlined and wrote The Invitation in just 2 weeks. But this wasn't a rushed project. They had been carrying the core idea for years, particularly the theme of emotional repression masked by groupthink. When the timing aligned, the script poured out with frightening clarity. Kusama later said that what drew her to the story was not just the premise, but the precision of its structure. Even more impressively, the final film deviates very little from that first draft. Dialogue remained intact. Major beats weren't shifted. The dinner party's emotional architecture was so tight that only small tweaks were needed during development. This kind of writing speed is rare, but in this case, it worked because the story wasn't built on plot twists, it was built on emotional truths. Truths that had been simmering for a long time. So the next time you watch it, remember, the dread you feel didn't come from months of revisions. It came from 15 days of raw, unfiltered honesty. Fact 16. The dog's death was a warning shot. Early in The Invitation, Will hits a coyote with his car. What seems like a tragic accident becomes something more disturbing when he calmly and bloodily puts the creature out of its misery. It's a jarring moment, not because it's violent, but because it's too controlled. That scene wasn't just character development, it was a psychological calibration. Will's ability to end suffering foreshadows the moral ambiguity of the choices he'll face later, but it also sets the film's tone. This isn't a story about survival, it's about decision. And yet, what many viewers miss is that this event echoes a second animal death, the family dog, whose fate is revealed off-screen. Will finds its collar in a drawer, no explanation, just an absence. The loss isn't just emotional, it's symbolic. In interviews, Kusama explained that the dog's death represents a severing of emotional continuity. The pet was the last remnant of Will's life before the tragedy. Its quiet removal mirrors how grief erases the familiar, leaving only the ritualized shell behind. What's more haunting? A violent death we witness or a gentle disappearance we never get to grieve? Fact 17. The film never leaves the house except once. The invitation is claustrophobic by design. Aside from the opening drive and a brief flashback, the film never leaves the house. But there's one moment barely noticed where the camera steps outside the narrative bubble. As Will explores the hallway alone, we cut to a brief, nearly subliminal flash of a birthday scene with his son. It's warm, handheld, saturated in color, completely different from the film's cold palette. It lasts less than 5 seconds. Karen Kusama called this the emotional rupture. It's not a flashback, it's a memory bleed. Will's grief momentarily punctures the constructed reality of the dinner party. And then, just as quickly, it's gone. The house reasserts control. This fleeting image was added late in post-production. Kusama feared the film was becoming too emotionally sterile. The birthday clip, drawn from personal home video footage, was her way of injecting something painfully real, then ripping it away. In a story full of performance and masks, is the scariest thing simply remembering what was lost? Fact 18. The final shot wasn't in the original ending. Most fans remember the invitation for its final, breathtaking image, Will and Kira standing on the porch as red lanterns glow across the Hollywood Hills. But that wasn't always the plan. In early cuts, the film ended with the couple escaping the house, bloodied and in shock. Fade to black. A small story, neatly contained. But something felt off. Kusama knew the horror needed to echo, not close. During post-production, they restructured the ending, adding the wide shot of LA lit up like a ritualistic constellation. The soundscape was layered with emergency sirens, subtle enough to suggest chaos, but never fully confirmed. It became the perfect anti-resolution. That one image reframes the entire film. This wasn't just a dinner party gone wrong, it was a coordinated event. A quiet apocalypse. And the audience, like the characters, had no idea until it was already too late. So the lanterns weren't closure. They were a flare, a signal, a revelation. How many other homes had guests who didn't get the chance to leave? Fact 19. The cult's video was shot like a seduction tape. Midway through the invitation, the guests are shown a short video from the cult, soft lighting, calming music, a woman smiling as a man dies beside her. It's meant to look peaceful, but every frame of it was engineered to manipulate your empathy. Karen Kusama brought in a separate team to shoot that scene, instructing them to approach it like they were making a wellness infomercial. The actors weren't told they were performing a death ritual, they were told to sell peace. That's why the woman's eyes never flicker with fear. That's why the lighting feels warm. The crew even used vintage camera lenses to soften the image, giving the footage an uncanny, out-of-time aesthetic. It was meant to resemble the kinds of self-improvement videos you might find online, blurring the boundary between comfort and coercion. But there's a deeper level. The woman in the video was cast to resemble Eden, subtly suggesting that she had already rehearsed this kind of spiritual release before. The implication: this wasn't her first time saying goodbye. So, when death is framed like a gift and filmed like a commercial, how do you know if you're being comforted or converted? Fact 20. No one in the film ever calls it a cult. Despite its central theme, the invitation never uses the word cult. Not once. And that omission wasn't accidental, it was philosophical. The filmmakers believed that labeling the group would defang the story. Once something is called a cult, the audience instinctively distances themselves from it. That would never happen to me, they think. But if it's just a group, a community, or a support system, the boundary becomes murkier, more dangerous. Even when things spiral into violence, the characters speak in therapeutic terms. We're trying to help you. You don't understand yet. There's no need to be afraid. These phrases aren't sinister, they're soothing, until they're not. In fact, many real-world cults avoid the term too. They present themselves as alternatives to traditional grief or psychiatry. That's what makes them effective. And that's what makes the invitation so unsettling. It never tells you where the danger begins. So if no one calls it a cult, does that make it any less of one? Bonus fact: The entire film takes place in a state of dissociation. There's a theory quietly endorsed by the filmmakers that the invitation isn't about a cult at all, or at least not in the way it seems. Instead, the entire film may be a meditation on dissociation, the psychological rupture that occurs when grief becomes too heavy to process. From the moment Will enters the house, his perception is fractured, sounds distort, flashbacks interrupt reality, hallways stretch longer than they should, conversations feel delayed, disconnected. The film doesn't just show trauma, it traps you inside it. Some critics argue that the dinner party is a hallucinated metaphor. Will never truly left the emotional wreckage of his son's death. The party becomes a performance of coping mechanisms, denial, distraction, spiritual bypassing. The violence isn't real, it's emotional. Each character represents a different stage of grief, but here's where it gets eerie. The film never breaks form. There's no reveal, no twist ending that confirms or denies this reading. Instead, it leaves the audience disoriented, mirroring Will's fractured reality. Karen Kusama has remained ambiguous about this interpretation. In interviews, she simply says, "It's a film about what grief does when you pretend it's gone." So maybe the real horror isn't what happened in the house. Maybe it's the idea that you could be living in a world you don't even recognize, and everyone around you is smiling through your breakdown. If this dinner party left you unsettled, you're not alone. The invitation isn't just a film, it's a quiet unraveling of everything we think we know about trust, grief, and belief. Tell us in the comments, which fact haunted you the most? And do you think the Red Lanterns were part of a larger plan, or just the beginning of something darker? If you want more stories buried beneath the surface of forgotten films, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Something stranger is always waiting behind the next door.